So we're going to write to questions. But what I am going to do is I'm going to ask Colonel Hughes the first question, because one thing, this is, I think, pertinent to our discussion now, and he didn't really get a chance to get into it. Give us, Colonel, because I know you have them, just a couple of brief bullets on what now in Iraq.
Thanks, Mort. Iraq, as you know, is very, very complex, and to try and figure out what is next requires a really comprehensive answer. But I just have it down to a few bullets, and I'm going to give them to you with a little bit of explanation. The first one is that the United States must reassess its strategic position in the world in light of its regional and international interests. If we don't know what we exist for, if we don't know why we as a nation are here today, then we really don't know what actions we're supposed to be taking, not only for ourselves, but with regards to the rest of the world. We really have to understand where we're going. As one of my favorite philosophers, George Harrison, once said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. We need to announce, my second point is, we need to announce a date for the beginning of redeployment from Iraq. And this isn't so much to satisfy the domestic criticism here in the United States, but it places the government of Iraq on notice. And in fact, I think that this has already occurred when General Petraeus said recently that he was going to redeploy the 5 brigades that had come over to Iraq as part of the surge. It was amazing to see how all of that political activity that I described in my talk began. So there is something that we can drive the train with and make sure that the Iraqi political development keeps moving forward. With regard to that, there will be some U.S. troops in Iraq for quite a few years, I think, probably in some form or fashion for another 8 to 10 years, not at the level that we see today. But we need to have a status of forces agreement with the government of Iraq. Not so much as to describe basing and stuff like that. It's to tell the Iraqi politicians, especially the Sunni politicians, that they have a say in the conduct of American forces that stay in Iraq. That really grates the Sunni politicians a great deal because they think that they have no say whatsoever. A status of forces agreement is something they will have to debate in their own parliament, and there the Sunni can be heard. We also need to resource and invigorate a very comprehensive political reconciliation effort in Iraq at the ground level. And the Department of State is the one that needs to be fixed for this. Our Department of State has been neutered by Congress over the years. When Senator Helms was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he took every step that I can imagine to take the Department of State apart, to destroy USAID with all of its experts, and to get rid of one of the most critical pieces that we need today in the war on terror, the United States Information Service. You know, that needs to come back. And, you know, it's only you Americans that are going to make that happen when you talk to your people in Congress. Then we need to immediately act and resource to increase both the size of the Marine Corps and the Army. You cannot fight a 13 or a 14 division war with a 10 division Army. It just won't work, and our forces are stretched badly. We need to get them out so that we can replenish them and care for them, and that includes our Special Operations Forces. Then we need to take care of our relations with our allies and our special partners. This administration has damaged the credibility of the United States around the world. Wherever I travel, we just aren't what we used to be in the eyes of the world because of what this administration has done. And that's going to take a lot of work by the next Secretary of State. That person best wear Adidas because they're going to be running around the world. And then finally, this administration, it's probably too late for them now, but the next administration must articulate clearly U.S. policy and communicate it to you, the American people, so that you understand why it's happening and can support it or reject it. But at least your voice can be heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel. I see Stephanie running around with a mic and some others. I've kind of got TV lights, so I may miss a question, but do I see one in the second row, or are you stretching?
Thank you very much, panel. I haven't heard anyone talk specifically about the economic ramifications of the war on the United States, and when you talk about 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. Second, somebody says that, or a lot of people have said, that the reason that this has dropped off the radar in the United States now that the economy is sagging and the dollar's spiraling downhill, it's not really a bread and butter issue with the United States. The supermarkets are still filled with food. We have tax cuts during a time of enormous spending. So do you think along the way that the Americans should be feeling this a little more, or quite simply, can we afford to go on another 50 years?
Volunteers, Dennis.
Yeah, well, I think one of the notable things about this war, and we've heard the phrase, "we are at war," and therefore all sorts of things are justified, including torture and other sorts of things. But for a country at war, I'd ask you what sacrifice have any of you made? I'm sure some of you have served in the military, but there are probably not very many of them. I think our military is increasingly a variation on the Foreign Legion. There is no draft. People hardly have any firsthand knowledge in the military. Increasingly, our leaders in Congress have never had military experience. And we've never been asked to sacrifice by this administration. Instead of asking us to pay higher taxes, to pay for the war, to reduce the budget deficit we're passing on to future generations, we have the mantra that we have to make the tax cuts permanent, and the tax cuts, over half the amount of the tax cuts go to the richest 1% of America. So I think it's, again, a fault of leadership and a certain amount of disinterest on the part of the Americans who feel that it's an abstraction and they can't relate to the problem.
I mean, this is something I would add, that this is something that astounds certainly Europeans, that, that kind of look back and see our apathy. I mean, I remember I was visiting Washington not that long ago, and there's a gentleman, he's got "Start Loving" written across the top of his forehead, and you kind of wonder, he's a little weird, but I stopped and talked to the guy's perfectly sane. He's been doing a one-man demonstration, and I asked him, I said, well, who even stops and notices you? He's at the steps of a Senate office building. He says, maybe about 5 people a day. Dennis Kucinich stopped the other day, got out, said thank you for your courage, and got back in the car and drove away. And I mean, you have to think about that. I think that's a really good point. We don't really seem to be involved because we're not involved. We're not threatened by a draft, and I don't think we see the direct connection between our economic troubles and the war over there, although there certainly is one. Another question?
Hi. First, I would like to thank Dr. Diskin for teaching us American history. I've always learned a lot more American history from our allies than I have from people inside our own United States, with our rich 200-year history. I was curious about a comment by Ambassador Jett, so I guess I would direct a question toward him. Talk about the responsibility of the media. We look at the fact that in the United States, it was literally, President Bush was one of the most popular presidents, I believe, at the beginning of the liberation of Iraq than potentially ever in the history of the United States. And then I've watched it go down to where he's not one of the most popular presidents. So I guess what I would ask is, something shaped that from the American populace. Potentially it was the media. And you cited some sources. I didn't actually hear the sources that you cited, where you talked about deaths of Iraqi civilians, potentially more caused by the war than ever in the history of the regime. And having been in Iraq in 1990, and then also being there again, so it's been quite some time that we've been over there and seen lots of deaths caused by the regime, both Kurdish, Iraqi, and surrounding countries. I'm just curious, what comment on the responsibility of the media and persons of your stature making comments like that aren't necessarily backed. I mean, you said yourself the media has disparaging numbers on the number of casualties.
Well, I guess, first of all, I'd make the point that it's hard to talk about the media because you have so many sources of information these days, it's hard to sort of lump them into one basket. You have people that attempt to report the facts objectively on the one hand, and then you have Fox News on the other. So that you've got a wide range of sources of information. A lot of it is driven by corporate interests in the bottom line, the closing of overseas bureaus, etc. As Mort alluded, there are fewer and fewer foreign correspondents of the kind that spent a career like he did. And a lot of people, I think, look to the media not for information. People don't listen to Limbaugh or watch O'Reilly because they want information. They want their bigotry blessed and their ignorant worldview validated. And so you can fault the media, but I think the media is also, because it is profit-driven, also responds to what the readers want. In the Gainesville Sun, international news is 3 paragraphs on page 3. That's because I think the people who read the Gainesville Sun care more about whether there's road construction that's going to interfere with their trip to school or to work, what's happening locally, etc. And so until people comprehend the fact that one of the benefits or downsides of globalization is that there is no problem that's very remote from affecting us directly and immediately, and that you have to make the effort to become aware of all of those funny little countries over there somewhere. And you have to demand that the media provides that information. And until that happens, the media is going to continue to do what the media has done, which is to underreport in some ways and to report other things in other ways that isn't particularly helpful.
I mean, I just want to add here that, I mean, you've got to keep in mind that media is one of those 5-letter collective nouns that means no more than stuff. It's sort of like saying, why did they hate us? Well, if you're taking 6.5 billion people and putting them all in a 4-letter pronoun, that's part of your answer. As Dennis said, I mean, you've got Geraldo Rivera, and then you've got people who've been killed trying to get very close to the story. And I think if you really actually, I mean, I'm a very harsh critic of the media. I've written 3 books, you know, kind of chewing it out, and I've left the biggest news organization there is because I just didn't like how things were going. But I've got to say, there's been some very, very good, solid, courageous reporting, and the fact that people don't actually seek this out and pay attention to it doesn't mean it's not there.
Well, may I just
sure,
mention, as someone who lives in Central Florida, and as a subscriber to the Orlando Sentinel, I pick up that newspaper every day to find what's going on in the world, and I fail to find it.
Yeah,
And a lot of the local newspapers are like that. Turning to television.
But, you know,
Television news is a business.
Yeah.
And it gets Nielsen ratings. And consequently, what do we hear about? Paris Hilton.
There's no question about that. You're absolutely right.
When I go abroad and I listen to BBC or France Inter, I think I'm living in a different world.
Well, you know, I'm on your side on that. But what I'm saying is, it was a comment I think I made to you on the way over here. I'm walking by this newspaper box with, you know, a kind person who's taking me over here, and there's a New York Times inside, and it doesn't take coins, and all it takes is a student card to stuff into to pick up a free New York Times, and you can't really read the Times online. You really have to look at the Times where the editors have thought about it. And there's a whole stack of them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody even bothers to pick them up. So on the one hand, you're absolutely right. Local papers and certainly TV news, and I mean, even last night, ABC last night, Charlie Gibson's talking about 80,000 dead in Iraq. I mean, you know, but it's a huge, monstrous thing, the media. So, yes, the media sucks. No question. If you can have one 5-letter word to cover it all, but it doesn't cover it all. So some of it's good. The problem is, as life goes on, whether or not the media is good or bad, and it's really up to us to inform ourselves and use the best thing we can. Anyway, I'm not here to talk. You guys ask questions.
May I just make one comment on that? Professors, we can't keep our mouth shut, but I think the other point, Colonel, and it's a very important one, is we have an alternative communications universe out there called the Internet. And increasingly, that Internet is being used, rightfully or for wrongfully, for all kinds of information, which is good information, and disinformation. And the trouble we have with that in my own field is we see how effective various terrorist groups and front organizations have effectively used the Internet for recruitment, for logistical training in the whole 9 yards. So my concern in many ways is really not so much with the internet, with media. And let me give you one illustration which you may recall very directly, where I thought pointed this out. Pierre Salinger, who a number of you know, was a brilliant correspondent, press secretary to, JFK, announced after the TWA aircraft went down that it was the result of what? A missile. Later on, this was the earlier days, later on he said, where did he get that information? He said he got it from the internet. But the point I'm driving at is the damage was already been done. So the only thing I would suggest, apropos of the point you're raising, is you really have to go through as much alternative media as you can. And it is very, very frustrating, but you can't kill the messenger that much, quite frankly.
Well, there's a very important point here that everybody forgets, and we can't forget. The internet is not a source. The internet is a delivery system. The internet is no more than the same thing that a roll of newsprint was. It's a blank sheet. There's good stuff on it, there's bad stuff on it, there's lies on it, and it's really up to the consumer to beware and to really check out sources. The internet is not a source. It's only a way to see other sources. Yes.
Colonel Hughes, you said that Iraqis don't want U.S. soldiers to leave because that would mean a return to violence. Whereas, Ambassador Haynes, you said that, quite frankly, Iraqis want U.S. troops out. Are you speaking to different populations within Iraq when you guys make these statements, or is there real confusion as to what the Iraqis want in terms of the U.S. presence?
I'm referring to polls that are taken periodically, none of which come out showing that a significant number of Iraqis want us to stay.
Let me ask a question, Colonel Hughes. What about this thing that just came out? This joint?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now. This was a poll done by ABC, BBC, ARD, the German network, and NHK, the Japanese network. The views of U.S. presence in Iraq, military presence, on the question of was the invasion right to do, last August only 37% of Iraqis agreed that it was the right thing to do. Now, this was a poll taken at the end of February, 49% say it was the right thing to do. That attacks on U.S. forces are acceptable. Last August, 57% of Iraqis said it was acceptable to attack American forces. Today, 42%. And on the question, should coalition forces leave now? In August, 47% said yes. Today, 38% say yes. So there are trends that are being developed. But Iraqis, quite frankly, tend to be schizophrenic about this. They don't like occupying forces. They don't like foreign forces. Historically, they never have. But they also are pragmatic enough to know that there is nothing to replace the American military and nothing to replace the security it provides right now in the most populous province of the country, that being Baghdad. So, yeah, they do want us out. They don't want us out right away. But please, let's give them some idea of when we're going to leave, under what conditions we would leave, and what their role is in getting us out, because they have a huge say in our departure. And one of the things the next administration needs to do is to talk to the Iraqis and listen to them and ask them these questions. And then when they give us the answer, accept it as the answer.
Colonel, given your familiarity with the situation and looking at I think it was like 1,200, so in the methodology, what do you think of that poll?
The poll, I was looking at the methodology. It's a very expensive poll. It uses a larger sampling base than a lot of other polls that I have seen. It looks like it's a pretty solid poll from my perspective.
Thank you.
This is our last question.
Okay, last question. Has anybody got a mic? Anybody want to go? Oh, yes. Okay.
My name is Larry West. I'm on the faculty here, but I've also not too recently retired after 28 years of active and reserve service in the Army. And in 2003, on this date, I was sitting in Kuwait wondering whether the war was going to start and wondering whether it was ever going to cool down. The war started, it never cooled down. I wanted to mention a couple of things about the situation in Iraq that, as I watch the media, doesn't come across very well. One is that Iraq has got a lot of institutions that never developed the way the similar institutions in the United States did. And that's one of the burdens that it faces. Police forces, industries, the way government works. Actually, Iraqi government is very efficient at the local level. It's very democratic, but as you start moving up from there, it tends not to be. And I think we all need to keep that in perspective when we start creating expectations in our own mind about what Iraq needs to do and when. They just are not starting from the same place we are. And the second thing I wanted to mention, because this never comes across, is the average Iraqi is somebody you'd like to have as a neighbor. They're very nice people. They're conservative. They're family-oriented. They're very concerned with education, with the welfare of their children. Very educated as a group. And like I said, you would not be concerned if one of these folks moved in next to you, at least once you got to know them. And those are the two things I think don't come across well. And we are going to make decisions when we vote about what ought to be done. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Thank you very much to everybody. I mean, this panel's been amazing.